What do employer branding, culture, and people experience all have in common? At the very heart of whether or not they succeed is an understanding and appreciation for human behaviour. EVP is about all the logical things, all the logical reasons why somebody would want to join you. It will cover the pay, the perks, the prospects, the projects, the people you get to work with, all those logical things that people would look at and decide whether or not they want to come and join your organisation. Branding, however, as fluffy as this may sound for some people, is about emotion. It's about building that emotional connection with your audience so that when all those logical reasons are ticked off, and they could be across 5 or 6 companies they're looking at, there'll be an instinctive gut reason as to why they choose you over everybody else. They won't be able to put their finger on it necessarily, but if your branding is doing its job, they'll just feel that they want to join you over the other organisations. Now, people are fickle. We may love you today, but we might hate you tomorrow. And that is a very fragile relationship based on the experience I have with you. Someone once said, to build a brand or reputation, you've got to walk up the stairs. But to lose it, unfortunately, you fall out the window. So if you take that employer brand, the understanding of emotion, and you make sure that is mapped across your entire people experience, then you can look for those opportunities to make or break that relationship by providing a great or not so great experience. And that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to talk about a little bit of human psychology and then look how you map that across the people experience to then find and prioritise the areas where you can make small improvements that when combined over the whole experience will have a massive impact to the quality and how you attract people, but also about how you retain and engage existing employees. Very quickly, some psychological principles. Now, I've stolen this blatantly from Rory Sutherland, as said in that book, Alchemy. Have a read of it. It's fantastic, around the behavioural science of marketing, not just the data-obsessed world I think we're in at the moment. But there are certain things to be mindful of in terms of looking at your people experience from attraction to alumni. The first one is the peak end rule. And this is basically says that people will overemphasize the recollection they have of an experience and how positive it was or negative based on the peak and the end part of it, the peak being the most intense. Say, for example, you go on a family holiday or a family day out, and it's a pretty drab, dreary day, non-eventful, quite boring. But on the way home, you stop off at a beautiful view and everyone gets out of the car and spends 15 minutes having a look at it. That's the intense part of that day. And then on the way home, there's no traffic. It's a smooth journey. No one argues with anyone. You don't want to murder the kids. You get home and the day is done. When you recall that day, you will remember that 15-minute view and the fact you didn't murder anyone in your family on the way home. And you'll overemphasize how positive an experience that day was when, as I said, really, if you look at the whole day, it was quite dreary and quite drab. The next principle is idleness aversion. And this talks to the point that as humans, we don't like doing nothing. We'd rather be busy, occupied, than sat there wondering and just waiting. If you're sat in a traffic jam, which includes a 10-minute wait, but you can kind of cut off and take a long route round, which will take you longer, you'd rather be moving in the longer option than sat there doing nothing, twiddling your thumbs. Uber created this. Uber realised this, hence the reason they created their map. So you could watch the little car coming towards you. It stopped you being idle and wondering. The next principle is operational transparency. People want to know what's going on behind the scenes. It puts them at ease. It makes the experience a whole lot better. And Rory Sutherland talks about Domino's Pizza and their pizza tracker. They get loads of complaints because pizzas are running late. So they tried all types of things, including giving people free pizzas if it was over half an hour. And that did nothing to slow down the amount of people calling in wondering where their pizzas were. People didn't really want to know whether, they didn't care that it was late. They just wanted to know what was going on. So they introduced the pizza tracker and people could see when it was in preparation, when it was in the oven, when it was out the oven, when it was being boxed up, and when it was coming out for delivery. The number of complaints and calls kind of really reduced quite significantly, which meant the people in the restaurants could carry on cooking the pizzas as opposed to dealing with angry customers. Uncertainty anxiety. When you don't know what's going on as humans, we get quite stressed. And again, Rory Sutherland says, you would rather know that a train is going to be 2 hours late than simply know that a train is going to be late. That last one leaves too many things uncertain. Do you need to make alternative arrangements? How long are you going to be there? Do I need to call the wife and rearrange a family event that we've got booked when I get home? But just by adding that element of transparency, it reduces that anxiety. And finally, the progress principle. Humans like to see themselves making forward momentum. Doing so is very motivational and it keeps morale high. So, as I say, high level, but now we're going to take those, map them over the user journey at a basic kind of condensed version, and see what we can do and the thinking that goes into how that can impact the people experience approach, and then the knock-on effect that could potentially have on your employer branding. Let me take you through something I was literally going to do in my last company. I'd arranged it, I'd planned the workshop, we were about to run it, but then unfortunately, how do I say this? The brown stuff hit the fan in terms of redundancy announcements. But we were just on the verge of running a workshop where I was pulling together the head of TA, the head of learning and development, the head of rewards, our HR VP was going to be in the room, and we were going to map this user journey from attraction, in this case to onboarding. So more the candidate experience, not the employee experience. So it was the candidate part of the people experience equation. And bearing in mind, we were in an environment where resources were quite scarce. Teams were small, budget was almost non-existent. But what I was driving was an initiative to see how we could make these small marginal gains, these 1% improvements at impactful moments of the candidate journey, which would then complement the brand we were trying to go to market with. So we weren't just kind of talking a great talk, but we could demonstrate at those key moments that we were walking it too. So I'm going to take those kind of behavioural, psychological principles I went through moments ago and show you how we were mapping this to the journey, and then we're going to spot moments that those teams could then go back and make those necessary small improvements. The collection of which would be greater than the sum of the parts would be greater than their individual things. So, starting with the application and the apply stage, and again, as I say, I've watered this down. I like to keep things simple. If you've come out of a kind of a business management, or you've worked in the likes of KPMG or McKinsey's or anywhere like that, this is 101 stuff, and I appreciate that. But as I say, just to keep it simple, so you can get the essence of what this is, and you may be able to take something practical from it to take it back to the companies, the organisations you're working for, and do something with this, dependent on the context that you're in. So let's just say you start with initial engagement, and that might be off-site, your social media copy or whatever that might be, a social media post, which drives someone to your career website. Now, having led the relaunch and rebuild of AstraZeneca's website a few years ago, I know that career website UX in itself can be a massive piece of work, and this whole thing I'm about to go through could apply to just that. But yeah, so bear with me on this. I'm conscious that this is high level. So I have seen a social media post and I've come to your website. I then have two options. I look at content, or I search for a job. And when I search for a job, I find one I like, and then I decide I'm going to start the application process. So I click apply. And then I go through the application process and I complete the application process. So then we're going to start thinking, right, of all those psychological principles, where do we start seeing opportunities based on what we know makes the experience or the perception of experience more positive for humans? And we identified that in that part of the journey, in that section of this part of the journey, that the application, starting and ending it, was the peak. So then I was starting to advise TA and go, right, let's look at that. Is it a kind of really bad or good experience? When someone clicks apply, do they get a form where they're asked for so much information that it becomes tiring and exhausting? Because it's all right having a great brand, but if someone has a really bad application process, as I said, your reputation, your brand, the positive sentiment you've built up towards it starts to fall out the window. And then we were going to go along in this process. So once you've applied, there's that waiting period, and you're waiting to understand and hear, is your application going to be progressed or are you going to be rejected? And then you take those behavioural principles we spoke about before and you say, well, these are key moments where uncertainty, anxiety, operational transparency, idleness, aversion start to kick in. And the decision of whether you are going to be rejected or going to be progressed is the end part of this section of the user journey, the peak end rule. So, for example, in that waiting period, people are uncertain. So when they apply, do they just get a letter saying, or an email out the ATS that says, thanks for your application? Again, thinking about how humans work, that's no good. There's no transparency. They're left anxious on whether they're going to succeed or not. And they're left there idle. So the recommendation there was going to be, look, let's review all the comms that comes out of the ATS. Our brand is this. So when we're communicating, we need to demonstrate that at every step. So for example, instead of leaving people idle, can you connect them to some content? How to prepare for an interview or how to write a CV, something that's quite altruistic that can help them not just with this application, but all their other applications. The uncertainty, anxiety, and the transparency, those two are quite tightly linked. Instead of saying thanks for the application, can you include something that says we aim to get back to candidates within 5 or 7 working days? Like the example I gave of the train earlier, people would rather know the train would be 2 hours late than just knowing that it's going to be late, because that doesn't help anyone. So we were getting all these small areas, small opportunities to improve the experience in a way that complemented the brand and was a great representation of the kind of culture that we were trying to foster. And then I think you get the idea, so I'm not going to kind of milk this, but then we're going to go to the interview and hire stage. So great, someone gets the decision that their application is going to be progressed. Then they've got that painful wait time for the interview to be arranged. Then you have multiple interview stages. And then you've got that really painful bit where you're waiting for your interview feedback. And again, you take the same theory, the same principles, and you identify where all those key psychological triggers are. Put yourself in the shoes of the candidates and the applicants and think to yourself, using design thinking, where you put the customer at the heart of every decision you make, and you sit back and go, right, how can we improve this experience in a way that represents the brand and is reflective of the culture that we're saying we are like to work within? So you're waiting for interviews. Uncertainty, again, can you give information? What can you do to help people pass the time? Can you send them to your website? Give them things to read about your culture, the journey you're on, get them excited. Then you have your interview stages. Every time there's feedback, and I'm going through it myself. You have an interview, you're waiting. Every time the phone rings, it's almost like I'm a teenager with a crush on a girl, and every time the phone rang, the phone would become a bar of soap. I was so excited, and then it wasn't her, and it's like, and that gut feeling. These emotions, they're genuine, they're real. Living it myself right now. So what can you do to help that experience? And whether the candidate is successful or not, they will feel positively towards you and maybe recommend you to someone else, even if they're rejected. As long as you let them down gently, in a helpful way, they may turn around to their family, their peers, their friends and say, look, I wasn't successful, but the experience was great, really reflective of the brand. I'd love to work there one day, and keep that positivity and that momentum going. And then again, you go through the interview stage. When you reject someone, do you give them really constructive feedback that they can take with them to their next search? They can learn and improve their chances the next time they jump on the interview rodeo, so on and so forth. So again, I'm not going to labour the point. I think you get the idea now. And then we would go from the head of TA with his team, with me facilitating the workshop. We're going to look at these moments and see again, what were those small things Not big grand gestures, not the sexiest, not the most exciting necessarily, but fixing these small basic foundational things would have such a significant impact to the experience, which again would have a positive effect on the employer brand. And then we were going to kind of have the onboarding team, learning team, who are going to look at onboarding. When someone accepts an offer and they've got 3 months' notice, do you just leave them wondering, nervous about their first day at their new school? Or do you send them information? Do you give them a call once a week or once a fortnight? What does the hiring manager do? Can you give them any materials just to prep them so their first day is as comfortable as possible for them? And they're really excited to want to join you, because that gap between offer and start can be quite a treacherous territory. People can change their minds. If they don't have a great experience, they can regret their decisions, so on and so forth. So that is it in a nutshell. How do you take your culture, your employer brand, the people experience, the understanding of how humans behave and what motivates them and the emotions they're having, and how can you feed all that into a really practical exercise or workshop where you can start to make those small improvements which will have a massive impact on all of those components to create and complement the brand you want to build, the culture that you're trying to foster, and the experience that you want people to have. As always, I hope you found it helpful. And if you'd like any support on any of this stuff, please give me a shout, drop me a message, leave a comment. And whilst I've got time on my hands, I'd really like to help somebody out there with all this stuff. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.